This is Michelle Morris, and I'm the pastor at Wesley and Kavanaugh United Methodist Churches. And this is a section I like to call Didn't Make the Cut. And it's where I talk a little bit about something that didn't make it into my sermon, but was really interesting and still has me thinking, and I thought you might find interesting too. So, what didn't make the cut this week, I was preaching on the Tower of Babel story and Pentecost. And in particular, I want to think about the Tower of Babel story, which is in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 9. And what caught my eye there that I didn't have a chance to work in, I did mention it in the sermon, that we always talk about the Tower of Babel as if God smashed the tower. And I noticed this time as I was preparing that it doesn't actually say that in the text. It says that God scattered the people. And watch my sermon from Sunday and you'll see why I think that was really the important part of that story. But it just says they left off building the city, they quit building the city, and it doesn't say anything about the tower being knocked down. And that has me thinking about a conversation I had with my husband not too long ago. He was talking about seeing the movie Noah, and he said, he was talking about how Noah had all those problems with his neighbors and was arguing with his neighbors. And I said, yeah, that wasn't in the text. And he said, what do you mean it wasn't in the text? It's always what I've heard, that Noah's neighbors thought he was crazy and gave him all kinds of trouble and everything. And I said, no, actually, that's not in the Bible. It's very common. We saw it in Evan Almighty. We see it frequently. There's been all kinds of stand-up comedy routines about how Noah must have looked crazy, but it's not in the Bible. And that reminds me that we fill in things in the Bible all the time, and I think the Bible is meant for us to do that. I think that there are so few details. It invites us to be creative and to bring ourselves into it. We just need to be aware that that's what we're doing. And in the case of us assuming that God smashed the tower and brought destruction down, I think that says much about what we think about God, what we think God should do, that God is in the business of smashing God's enemies and destroying things, when all too often we take biblical texts that actually don't say that God did anything. People are the problem, and we import on that our own assumptions that that's maybe how we think of God. And there's places in the Bible where it looks very much like God's doing the destruction, but too often we give God credit for things that the Bible doesn't actually say God does. And I think that says a lot about us too. I think it says something about us in the way we interpret the Noah story, that we would be judgmental of something that was asked to do something so bold and brave in the name of God, and that we would assume if we had a problem with people that we would smash their world. That's a sobering thought for us, and should give us some pause and make us think a little bit more deeply about who God actually calls us to be, who God is, a God that loves and a God that seeks life for all of us, and then how we behave in the midst of that. I think humanity does great good and wonderful things, but I think we also do great evil, and I think we too often import that into our biblical text to justify it. So just a word of caution that we should maybe take time to read more closely and not make assumptions about what's in there. And when we do fill things in, and that's a long-standing tradition, it's called Midrash in the Jewish society or in Jewish practice, which is to tell a story around the story and make it fuller, and that's a holy and beautiful thing to do. But let's always be aware that that's what we're doing. We're bringing ourselves into the text and not necessarily being 100% true to what the text says. Okay, that's all. Just some thoughts to think of in addition to what I threw out there in the sermon. And I'll talk to you all again soon. Take care.